Okay, thanks, Robin, and welcome everyone to the webinar. I know it's an early or not so early morning, but glad that everybody could join. So my name is Mikko Hytonen. I'm the CEO of Dooap, and just maybe a brief introduction. So I've been in the software business 20 years plus, both in finance and business roles, and maybe just a few words on Dooap, just to tell you what is it that we actually do. So we're a company that is purely focused on AP automation, and specifically in the Microsoft ecosystem. So we're supporting clients that are running either Dynamics 365 Finance or AX 2012. And if you want to get more information about Dooap or my background, you can always visit our web pages and go to LinkedIn and see from there. So moving on to the presentation. So I'm going to start a bit with what is AP automation. Some of you may be familiar with the concept, but I'm going to share our thinking into that. And then kind of moving on to the machine learning topics, going through a bit the differences between RPA, robotic process automation, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, and how those relate to each other. And then I think what will be very interesting to see is that what are kind of the opportunities that machine learning and AI present to the finance organizations nowadays, and then going more into the accounts payable or purchase to pay process. I'm going to present some of concrete use cases, what we have in our product, and what the market overall looks like. And then I'm also going to give you a brief demo what the machine learning actually means in practice. And as Robin was mentioning, towards the end of the presentation, there's the chance to ask any questions you may have. Okay, moving on then. I think starting with the basics in terms of AP, what we've actually seen with our clients and prospects is that surprisingly large quantity of companies haven't really paid attention to AP automation, and what we've actually seen that almost 75% of organizations have done nothing about the topic. I think this varies a bit depending on the company size, industry, and so forth. But no matter what the figure is, there's actually quite a big opportunity out there to automate your AP process. Then if we look at Microsoft Dynamics users specifically, we actually had a research conducted by Level towards the end of last year, and we were kind of looking into the pain points what folks see in the AP process. And I think as you can probably figure out, manual data entry and inefficient processes, that's kind of the main driver there. Also manual routing of the invoices for approval, that's painful if you need to do that manually. And I think then probably where machine learning also comes into play quite a bit is the high number of discrepancies and exceptions, because I think there are kind of let's say real exceptions when you just can't figure out how something should be, but mostly I think the exceptions and discrepancies are due to errors in the process, and obviously that is something where a tool can help you. And then I think kind of going into the beginning of the process, there are still obviously a lot of invoices in paper format, which always is a problem when you're planning automation. And I think we're all familiar with the other issues resulting there are lost or missing invoices, and I think the rest of the topics then here have to do with the visibility into what is going on in your process, how the process actually works in general, because sometimes getting the approvals may be painful, and it takes a lot of time from the organization, and even kind of just the time to process invoice can be measured in days or even weeks, whereas it should rather be hours or maximum days. Then kind of what's holding companies back in terms of the automation. I think what we hear a lot is that there are other priorities, and I'm sure there are, because obviously there may be reporting some statutory requirements and so forth, or let's say other system projects which are holding back bringing something new onto the plate. But I think that's the way it's always gonna be. But obviously how we see things is that AP automation is kind of simple and straightforward, and it should be something that is pretty much high on the priority list. What we hear quite a bit is that it's kind of complicated to implement AP process automation. It's not really like that. I think if you adapt to the standard system, take what's available out there and kind of adopt your process more to the market standard, it doesn't need to be that complicated. And then I think many of our clients and prospects tells us that, well, our AP process is not really broken, so there's nothing to fix there. But I think what we tend to say into that is that you may think it's not broken, but when implementing really modern AP automation, that will start to give you benefits from day one, and then you realize that, hey, actually my process was broken. Moving on, I think how we see AP automation really and the whole process, it's a way of thinking, trying to make everybody's life easier in the process. I think it's really starting from receiving the invoices, going all the way to the different approvals that you have in the process. I think whatever you're doing in terms of AP automation, it's really the ease of use that is driving adoption, because no matter what you're implementing, if it's not easily approachable to the persons operating in the process, obviously we all know that getting a buy-in into something like that, it's difficult. And I think how we're kind of otherwise looking at AP automation is that it's really kind of twofold. It's the process automation, and then it's kind of the more technical side where you have the transaction handling automation. And I think both these are areas where machine learning can help a lot. And I think what the process automation really means here is that if everything is okay on a vendor invoice you're receiving, you probably don't want to have any extra clicks in processing that. Rather just have a dashboard where you can actually check that everything's flowing nicely in your process. And I think then when it goes back to the transaction handling automation, that's kind of the other area where you can get a lot of benefits as well, because if we look at the purchase invoices by nature, you keep pretty much receiving similar invoices every month, week, or day. There may be some differences, but in terms of the overall context, it pretty much remains the same, and that kind of gives a great potential to machine learning, because if something repeats in the data similarly, then it's kind of, I wouldn't say very easy, but at least easy to spot that from the data, and then it's pretty straightforward to apply that into a system or a process. And I think speaking of the transaction handling, an important area there is the user behavior patterns, because how we like to see the process is that it actually adapts to the different types of users you have in the process. Obviously, if you're processing AP, processing the invoices, you have totally different needs from a person who's actually approving those invoices, and I'm gonna get back to that a bit later, what it means in practice. But I think in terms of adapting to AP automation, really it's the ease of use independent of the role which you're holding in a company. Kind of from the beginning, what is the most important thing, and what we keep promoting a lot, because that is where the automation starts. So if you have a paper invoice, if you have paper in the AP process or whatever process for that matter, it kind of makes sense to get rid of that in the very beginning. And obviously, I don't think anybody wants to have a lot of paper around, but I think the more important thing really is that when you scan OCR your paper invoices, you capture all the important metadata that you actually have on the invoice, meaning that then pretty much the use cases for that data, it's kind of abundant. There are a lot of them, and I think really getting into automated AP process, it's not really possible unless you get rid of the paper. So I think we can all agree on that. And I think then going a bit back to the process, and I think what we hear a lot as well is that AP process is complicated. It has evolved over time. There are a lot of different steps there which we need to take into account. Certain processes we need to follow and so forth. But our take really is that there are things that are important and there are things that aren't that important. So I think kind of looking at the high level picture, AP process is relatively simple. I mean, we receive the invoices, we process and approve, and in the end, we're paying our vendors. And kind of when looking at AP automation, I think these are kind of the cornerstones you should be keeping in mind, because even though they are complicated phases in the processes, in the end, the big picture is pretty simple, and I think that should be always something on top of our minds when we're thinking about AP automation. Then the benefits, obviously saving time and money. I think that's something that we all want to see happening. Of course, you may question that, okay, if we're investing into a new system, how we're getting the savings, and I think really it's about saving the time, and not only with AP folks, because I mean, if you look at overall people that are involved in the AP process, it pretty much touches all the roles in a company, especially if something is going wrong. Then we start to figure out that what is this invoice about, who should be approving, did we actually buy these goods, and so forth. So I think when something goes wrong, that is really when we start spending everybody's time. And I think the clear benefit of having very modern AP process is that you don't have those exceptions that much. I think one important thing is really scalability, and what this means is that the system kind of adapts to your business needs. Obviously, generally the invoice volumes that everybody is dealing with are pretty stable, but if there are any changes in the business, the system also adapts, and it's kind of easy to make sure that we're compliant with the new situation. One important thing really is the visibility, because I think we all want to have total control and visibility on the invoices that are going through our process. What are out there? What are the exceptions? There should be real-time reporting on what is happening, both on the process, but also what kind of invoices are we having there, and if there are any anomalies or exceptions, those should be flagged then on a dashboard, because then the kind of philosophy is that whatever is business as usual should not really be that much highlighted on the dashboards, but if it's something exceptional, for sure it should be there. Then maybe just briefly the process and what does accounts payable automation mean with Dooap, and I think it's pretty much the same for other AP automation systems, so there isn't that much of a difference in terms of the process, but just to briefly explain this. So there are obviously many ways of receiving the invoices. It could be on a paper, it could be email, there could be some sort of EDI system, sometimes there are electronic invoices and so forth, but no matter what the format is, I think the key thing is that from the beginning of the process, we capture all the data on the invoice, and of course make sure the invoice is valid and so forth, and the data is accurate. Obviously, there's always a workflow. The approvals may be a bit different if it's a PO or non-PO based invoice, but the workflows are kind of in the core of any AP automation system. Non-PO coding. So obviously, if you don't match your invoice against any PO, then you need to worry about how to put in the coding, and that's kind of the areas I'm going to cover later on, because that is something where machine learning can help a lot. Then if it's a PO-based invoice, obviously matching against the PO. Reporting, as mentioned, kind of getting the total visibility into what is happening with your invoices and payables is something that you need to see on top every time. Archiving, audit trail, and compliance, obviously something that we always need to have. And then I think the final step, integrating all that into the ERP system and making sure that our vendors get paid. Then kind of moving on to RPA, machine learning, AI, a bit explaining the difference between these three. AI is kind of the overreaching concept here. So whatever is something that a machine can do pretty much automatically or autonomously, I think that falls under the AI category. Machine learning is a subset of that. So really kind of integral part of of the AI. I think if you just look at some of the other AI use cases, you may consider them to be a bit more advanced than machine learning, but really machine learning is in the core. And I think then there's the robotic process automation, which in my mind isn't really AI, because that's typically very much rule-based. But then again, you may think that even a rule has some intelligence in it. So I think it's a bit of a matter of interpretation how you think about RPA when it comes to the AI space. I think if we look at the different concepts, so RPA, that's in a way like a virtual employee, or maybe you would call that a robot. So you actually have a use case, you have the rules, you know what you're supposed to do every day, every hour in a similar manner. So then it makes sense to use the robotic process automation. And I think this is something that you would typically see if you're kind of integrating some process parts that are not normally integrated. Let's say if you had more of a traditional AP processing in your ERP, you may want to bring in some data outside of the ERP workflows onto the invoices every time. So that is probably something where you could use the RPA process, because it would be a repeating task that someone needs to do in a similar manner every time. And if it's in a similar manner, there's no reason why a robot couldn't do that. Then I think when we move on to the machine learning, that is really when you start to use the data that you have. So I think if we look at the processing power we have nowadays, there's plenty available out there. So what we're essentially doing, as the term suggests, we're learning from the data. And what that means is that we're identifying repeating patterns because we have all the history there. We have a very robust feedback loop in terms of teaching the system. So if it looks like that something wasn't right, then obviously we need to change that. And I think where the learning part comes into play, the system can also adapt to those cases autonomously. And I think then again, what is important to keep in mind, quality of the data is a key, because no matter how smart AI system you have, and you have poor data quality, that will always be an issue. So I guess kind of making sure that you have the best data available will greatly help the efficiency of the machine learning process. There are out-of-the-box solutions and algorithms available which you can use, although I would say that generally when you start to implement something relating to machine learning, it's really about trial and error. So the process is kind of very agile. So you need to learn, make the mistakes, and improve the model. And I think this is something that typically takes time. Of course, there are use cases where the products kind of the shelf will do the trick, but when it's becoming more advanced, that's not always the case. And then I think when looking at the next step from machine learning, then we're going into deep learning, which more takes us then towards the kind of real AI space. And I think we've all heard a lot about that, but I think simply put, it's really simulating human intelligence. And I think what that really means is that you can really adapt to the exceptions, because I think that's what we humans are good at. So if there's a situation that we haven't seen before, we still know what to do, and it's not like we need to reboot our system every time. But I think AI is really gearing towards that there would be the natural intelligence embedded into the process. Obviously, the algorithms are much more complex. You need to have the ability to interpret what you're actually doing. Am I doing it well? Am I being efficient? And I think also learning from the data really intuitively. So if there are exceptions, you kind of figure out those and spot the anomalies and can adapt to the new situation. And I think this is really the complex, or the most complex form you can have, and I think you can spend a lot of time in it, and I think many companies are doing that, because for sure the benefits are great, because let's say looking at AP automation process or AP process, with that kind of tools, you can get really close to 100% level of autonomy. This is just quickly showing you a bit of the evolution, how AP automation has evolved during the past years. So I think initially there was a workflow engine that could have even been a manual one. Then we had the more rule-based automation, then some RPA use cases, moving on to machine learning and AI, getting closer to the 100% level of automation. And I think one thing here I always want to add is that you may think that does anybody really want to get to the 100% level of automation, because someone may think that, okay, then I'm losing control of my process and the machine just does that for me. But that's not the point. How we're then operating is actually making sure that we're constantly monitoring the process through dashboards and obviously alarms and so forth if needed. So really that means that we're more turning our focus towards the monitoring, and I think before we're at the 100% level, there are going to be a lot of exceptions we still need to manage. Then moving on to some of the use cases for machine learning and AI. I think if you've been into seminars and following up what's happening on the market, I guess the predictive modeling has been around for a long time. So what this can mean is like your forecast. Typically when you manually input that, that is based on the past figures anyway. So there's no reason why any machine couldn't do kind of the first cut for you. But I think it's kind of surprising that still we are operating kind of in a manual way, so that we're not really using the tools for predictive modeling, which are available and pretty much off the shelf. So you don't need to have any tech background or anything like that to be able to implement the tools that are already out there. So I'd say this is kind of the classical use case. And kind of together with that we have the data analysis. So what we tend to do, especially in the finance organizations, is kind of analyze the deviations, try to figure out where that is coming from. And similarly as we do it, the machine can do it as well. So if there's a kind of huge difference in your spending category versus the previous month, obviously it's pretty easy to spot that on a report which has been provided to you by the machine learning tools, because it is just kind of going back into the data and figuring out what happened there. Maybe just a little flag there that apparently there was an invoice from this vendor that we didn't have last month, and that is why we have a huge deviation in the spending. I think when we're looking at machine learning and automation in general, where the focus really is initially is kind of getting a bit rid of the basic data entry or processing, not really entering transactions, but really focusing on the exceptions, because I think if it's a standard data entry, standard transaction, there's no reason why a machine couldn't do that. And then I think for the system integration part, that is something where the RPA more comes into play. So if you have different systems you're running, kind of integrating those obviously with the modern integration platforms, or then if it's kind of a manual task that you need to have in the process anyway, then it can make sense to use the RPA tools out there. I think fraud detection overall is a topic that we should probably even be focusing a bit more, and that is what we've kind of done with our approach, because there are fraudulent invoices. I think all of us are familiar with the different phishing schemes that are there pretty much on a daily basis. So kind of the fraud detection really is something where AP automation can help a great deal, because you have access to all the data, you know what has happened in the past, so it's very easy to kind of identify by the means of machine learning the exceptions that you should be worried about. And then I think overall, looking at the use cases, it could be finance organization. I think mostly it's customer services though, but if you're getting a lot of questions from your organization or from different stakeholders, kind of having a chatbot in the process answering maybe the simpler ones or even more complicated ones by ways of machine learning, that makes a lot of sense, because that means that you're really saving time. Then moving a bit more into the AP cases specifically. So this is probably one of my favorites, because when you're matching your invoice against the PO and the quantities, the amounts add up, there isn't really anything you should be doing about that, because the PO has been approved, you receive the goods, everything is in order, so there's no reason why the invoice shouldn't flow through your AP system automatically. And then you may ask that, okay, do I need any machine learning for that? Not necessarily, but I think where the machine learning really comes into play is that you always have some of the exceptions. You may have some miscellaneous costs, you may have some freight cost, you may have some other items from your invoice which a bit differ from the original PO. And obviously when we have all this data in the background and we can use it through the means of machine learning, that actually gives us the possibility to automate even many of the exceptions where you would typically need a human interaction. So that is why I'm really calling it advanced PO matching here. And then I think one very solid use case for AP is really the automated expense invoice coding. So if it's a non-PO invoice, you actually want to make sure that the coding is right there. It's similar for similar invoice every month, day or week. And that is where machine learning can help a great deal. Of course, you have a rule-based logic here as well. You could say that invoice from this particular vendor is always cost for premises or something like that, or air tickets or whatever. But I think when we're implementing machine learning into the coding part, what it really means is that we're able to run through even the more complex cases, because we know from the history what has been happening with a particular invoice, and we can then easily adapt to that. Of course, you can always have a checkpoint there where you actually reviewing that. Did we actually get it right? Is this correct? And that is something again where AP folks come into play, so they can really just make sure that everything looks to be okay. And then I think one of let's say the more complex use cases could be there, that when you're actually capturing all the data from your invoice, and it can be email, it can be paper, doesn't really matter, because we can obviously recognize all the characters on the invoice and then feed that back to our machine learning models. So what that actually means is that it's no longer just the basic data you would have on an invoice, but it's actually all the data that you can use for learning purposes and further automate your process and systems. So I think that's one of the very powerful use cases which we're going to see more and more going forward. Then in terms of approval workflows, this is kind of an area you may of course adapt to the workflows that you're having in your ERP, but then again there are exceptions, and I think one of the areas that we've realized with our clients is that it would be very helpful if there's a prediction for certain type workflows. So how should a certain invoice be approved? What's the workflow behind, and what are the steps there? And that will obviously save a lot of time. And I think here it's also important to note that all the workflows that will be then implemented by the machine learning, they are following the delegation of authority of the company and other controls in place. So it is not something that a machine can just decide that this is going to be the workflow, but it's always following the rules that are embedded in. Okay, I'm actually going to just show you a quick demo here. Just give me a moment. And another moment. And by the way, if you have any questions at this point of time, just feel free to put them into the chat. Okay, so this is actually now where I'm demonstrating how the workflows work in the system powered by machine learning. So I actually have here a non-PO invoice, so an expense invoice, which we received from a vendor, and there's also kind of the predefined workflow for that. What I now see here on the top left-hand corner is that there's kind of constant analysis going on in the background, that what are the probabilities of this being right and who should actually go and approve this. And then of course if you click on the different workflows here, then you're getting different approval workflow. But I think the more interesting point here is that now when we're looking at this invoice, and of course if the probability is 39% for the right workflow, that is not what we want to have. But then I just realized that, okay, it looks like I'm having here wrong dimension, and let's actually switch it to something it should be. And now you can actually see that the machine here in the background is predicting that 99% is the probability that this should be the approval workflow. And I think in this case you can be pretty confident that that is the right one. And I think when it comes to the workflows, typically 99% is very high probability. So I'd say if even sometimes when you're somewhere at 60%, that's pretty much where you know that this is the way it should be going. And kind of this is how the machine learning works in the background and in practice. We're constantly feeding the machine the data, and it's learning from that. And whenever we have all the history there and also the kind of new invoices, the model becomes very robust and accurate. Okay, moving back to the presentation. Something I was mentioning earlier, I think really in terms of the user experience, what we also want to do by the means of machine learning is that the system is constantly learning from the behavioral patterns. So if you're likely to use certain screens in your AP solution, and I think that's very dependent on the different roles as well, then the user experience should be adapted to that. So obviously in systems there are always things that not everybody needs, and that's kind of where machine learning can help, because obviously if you're approving invoices, all you need to see in the system is actually those screens or views where you have the tools relevant for you. I think the fraud detection part I already touched earlier on. So I think especially in AP and payments, that's really a core thing. So we really want to spot the exceptions from the data and always flag those and make sure nothing goes through that shouldn't go through. So I think this is one of the more powerful use cases as well, and something that we see every now and then. There are fraudulent invoices, and it could be little things on the invoice that actually reveal that there's an issue here, and that is where machine learning comes into play. Then I guess the future, what I'm just saying here is that looking at all the tools that we have at our disposal for AP process, and I think certain other processes as well we're running, I truly believe that it's gonna be 100% automation. It will probably not happen the next year, maybe not the following, maybe not in 5 or 10 years, but I think eventually we're getting there. And I think how we see it is that kind of starting with adopting your process to pretty much the market standard AP, going with the tool that has all the features you need makes a lot of sense, and kind of getting started is very simple and straightforward. All right, thanks everybody for listening in, and now if there are any questions, happy to answer them, and of course later on as well, if anything comes into your mind, you can contact me either by email or phone, whichever you find more convenient. But I guess now we're having some time for the questions.
Okay. Yes. Kamesh wanted to speak his question, so take you off of mute. Okay, you're self-muted now, so go ahead and unmute and you can speak.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, hello.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so this is Kamesh from India.
Hi, Kamesh.
Oops, you're on mute again.
What is the future of Dynamics AX developer? Whether as a developer I have the knowledge of X++. What is the future that what you want me to learn? You need to learn machine learning or the algorithms, Python and such.
Sorry, I think we missed the first part of your question. Could you just repeat it? Because I think you were on mute for a while.
Yeah. So actually, my question is, what is the future of AX, the Microsoft Dynamics D365 AX developer? As of now, I know X++ and C#. Based on your seminar, webinar, I could sense that it's very neat that I need to learn Python and other machine learning algorithms. Can you explain what and all I should learn so that to equip myself for automation?
Yeah, Python is of course one tool and something that we're using as well. Although I'd give you maybe a bit different answer, because what we've seen when we're experimenting different areas of machine learning, that it's kind of first figuring out what is it that you want to do, and then looking at the tool set there, because I think with modern technology, really, you shouldn't be that stuck with really the technology or programming language, because it's a bit case by case. But I'd say that Python is a great way to start.
Okay, I just want to continue with my first question. So I also it's that I should not I have a knowledge in D365 functionality and also development. So from now onwards, I feel that I need to learn Python and other machine learning algorithms. Am I correct?
Yeah, of course, if that's an area where you want to focus on. And I think kind of here I was more explaining the kind of overall logic, but I think if you're specifically looking at Dynamics 365 and so forth, I think it's helpful, depending a bit on the use case, what you're trying to solve. Maybe just look at what are the options there, what are the programming languages. Perhaps there are some ready-made tools, but I think the point is that no matter which part of the process or which system you're using, my prediction is that if you invest your time in taking some courses or learning around the machine learning stuff, that's gonna pay off for sure.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thanks for your time, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, that was the only question in the queue. So I think I'll just say thanks very much, Mikko, and thanks everyone for attending.